Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. This podcast seeks to give a voice to real people around the world who are attempting to stay free, stay sovereign, and stay sane in a world which is changing faster than ever. In this episode, I talk with JC, a ballroom dancer and early member of the anti-lockdown movement. JC grew up in a religious community, and having witnessed at an early age the irrational nature of human psychology, he offers his unique insights into the post-COVID world, how humans have become gripped by fear, and how to free the mind and the soul. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and if you have any feedback or suggestions for interesting guests, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. A link is in the show notes. On to the episode. JC, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
No worries at all. It's really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really good to chat after kind of being in the same Twitter circles for quite a long time. I think that we probably go back at least a year in the Twitter sphere, but we've never actually kind of talked like this. So, it's great to be having this conversation. I don't know too much about you, and the audience might not as well. So do you want to just give a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah, so I am from York, North Yorkshire. I am a ballroom dancer by trade. I also work at a gym, so I do a bit of both, which we'll probably get onto this later, but I was quite grateful for with everything that's happened this last 20 months, having like a stable income from that. One of the reasons why I joined Twitter actually last year, I've always been very open to things like psychology and many different perspectives and points of views. And again, I'll discuss that more with you later. But for me, it was one of those things, days being very long and lots going on, to be able to engage with lots of other thought processes. It's just something that stimulates me generally. I would say I've got quite a creative mind coming from like the dance background and things like that. So with regards to Twitter, I would say that really does stir all of those creative thoughts, just like it does with my dancing and things like that, which is one of the reasons why I plugged into Twitter last year.
Did you say that you own a gym?
No, I just work for a gym. It's just a local gym. It was actually, I used to be employed by a company. It was actually a charity that it's my dad's church, which again, I'll talk about later on, that I was employed by. And basically I ran the dance school as part of the organization. Sort of professionally, and then helped them out sort of when I was free to do that. But then that kind of went a different way. Obviously things changed with that. Financially, things weren't quite the same as they used to be. So I decided to go self-employed. So I got a job at a gym working there, which is a very different role, which is quite nice actually, because it's very different to what I do when I'm teaching. I'm now self-employed, but I'm still able to work from the same venue, which is great because I still get to be involved in a lot of the projects that my mum and dad do there at the church, which is really, really, really good. Okay,
so I imagine doing that kind of work that you were pretty affected by the lockdowns, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've never really been keen on online things with regards to teaching and dance. I know that it's massive in the respects of the technology, things like Facebook, Instagram, whatever. People have managed to really plug into that, have been very successful. Everything is very much, they make a career of being online. There's always been something about me that thrives on human interaction, that thrives on somebody walking into the studio and not only teaching them, but knowing them as an individual, knowing them as a person. The whole concept of, for me, each person that I teach, I'm gauging who they are as an individual, kind of how they learn, how they perceive things, how they move their body, things like that. So I think for the lockdowns, when then it was potentially suggested that I would have to do things like Zoom classes and things like that, it was just completely alien to me. And yet people are doing it all over the world. I go on YouTube regularly with people coaching and doing kind of like 10-minute technique videos or things like that. And just for me, it was not something I could get my head around at all. And of course, the fact that I was being told that I couldn't go to the studio was even more of a problem for me. So yeah, it was hard.
So was that the reason that you kind of started on the anti-lockdown journey, or was there something else that set you off? Was that a kind of like a philosophical belief you already had? Like, what's your origin story there?
Yeah, interesting. So no, it wasn't. I would say that I've always been, maybe not always. I would say I've always been part of a family that's been very questioning and very open to debate, particularly over the last 17 years. And I'll just share a little bit of my story to how I came to where I am today. So obviously, I hate using the word church because, again, what that represents to me and to everybody else will have a particular thing. I was part of a Pentecostal church since I was a young boy, really raised in the church. My mum and dad, it was my granddad's before, then my dad took over. We were always a very modern, a very kind of like forward-thinking community, but still kind of held fast very much to the narrative of, kind of you're either bad or good if you don't follow the dogma that we're telling you should follow, kind of like hell, heaven, all of this kind of your typical kind of story. And then 17 years ago, a particular incident happened in our family. I'm allowed to swear?
Yeah, sure.
The shit hit the fan big time. You could say it was one of the big no-nos that was committed. And we had quite a big walkout from the community. And really, I would say it was from that day on, we could have gone one of two ways. We could have either fallen more into the dogma and become even more kind of overly religious, but instead it actually swung us the other way to ask major questions of everything that we were told was supposed to be the reality of this faith that we had, which was love, kindness, forgiveness, turning the other cheek, acceptance, walking the journey with people, taking the coat off your back and giving it to your neighbor. All of this kind of stuff just didn't happen at all. And the people that we needed just were not there. So basically, the establishment that we'd given our lives to that told us that somehow it would all be okay, it ended up just crumbling around our ears, really. And we spent 17 years walking this process of, in a way, slowly realizing so much historically of what you're told to be true. It isn't because it's necessarily true. It's just because your dad tells you it's true and their dad told them it's true and they told them it was true. And ultimately, this narrative that you give your life for has so many holes and so many problems within it that unless sometimes something like that happens, it never kind of pushes you to really see whether what you said you believe is what you believe, if that makes sense. And from that point, really, we realized that it just didn't work for us anymore. And it's interesting because in questioning that narrative, everything now from that moment on, I don't hold too tight. It's like I say, I've been there before. I believed everything I was told. It didn't work for me. And now I kind of feel, particularly with this whole COVID thing, I was already kind of looking into things like, the Vatican and Agenda 2030 and, all that kind of stuff that came up. But really, that's why now I would say I'm so open to the understanding of never being closed-minded with things, because that's when ultimately you end up being connected to something that really doesn't bring any liberation or any life in a way.
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting that you say that you were kind of in a family that was always questioning things, because I find that that's actually a relatively common theme amongst people who kind of are awake to what's going on. They seem to have that seems to have been nurtured, at least some level of kind of questioning things as a child, which definitely was the case as well for myself. Like within my family, we were always kind of raised to be very critical and questioning of everything that was going on, and to kind of develop a personal opinion that wasn't just, believing whatever the mainstream opinion was or whatever the kind of dogma of the day was. So yeah. So when it came to the lockdowns specifically and the kind of whole coronavirus thing, I imagine that even pre-lockdown in the UK, you were already kind of smelling the bullshit, right?
Yeah, 100%. So I remember very clearly, I still have the messages on my phone. I was actually working a shift at the gym on the day that the first lockdown was announced. I think it was the Friday, and I think the lockdown was going to start on the Monday. This was the first one. And I remember being still in the reception area because everyone was in the cafe lounge looking at this TV screen, you know, kind of shocked at what we were hearing, really. And I remember WhatsApping my mum, saying to her, there's something not right here. There's something very wrong. And she said, I know, babe. That was her reply. She went, it seems like there's some sort of reset going on. And at that point, we hadn't heard the term the Great Reset, right? So that wasn't something that we'd heard. She just, again, knew that there was just something very, very fishy going on. And again, I don't know I can't explain it. I don't know whether you get this, but it's like, it's like this internal kind of, call it a hunch or something that just does not sit right. It's like almost like a sixth sense. It's just nothing that, and I heard all this kind of talking around me, people, you know, like, oh, you know, this virus, we're going to lock down. I'm just stood there thinking this, none of this just adds up. And this was before, even when I started seeing the footage coming out of China, right? It's like, I'm thinking, I'm just not buying it. And I didn't really know why I wasn't buying it. It was just this overwhelming conviction that it wasn't what it appeared to be.
Interesting, because my story kind of coming into this is very different. I actually was a real strong believer whilst everyone else.
Interesting.
Well, before people were really talking about it, you know, it's kind of strange because my first kind of exposure to it was in the Bitcoin community, and a lot of the Bitcoiners were kind of talking about it very early on. We're talking kind of, you know, in like January and early February when it wasn't really mainstream conversation. You know, it was a bit here and there in the news. It was a kind of side news story. But they were saying, you know, this is going to be huge. You need to start buying supplies. You need to get ready because, you know, shit's going to hit the fan, and, you know, we're going to have to stay separate from each other for like 6 months and all this kind of stuff. And loads of people are going to die. There's going to be bodies on the streets. And, you know, I kind of believed a lot of that. But then later down the line, you know, it was almost like I was coming out of that. And a lot of the Bitcoiners were the same. You know, a lot of people who were kind of in that community started saying, actually, you know, it's not the case. You know, the data's coming in, and it looks like it's not that. You know, that the virus is not that deadly, etc. And it's almost like just as the Bitcoin community, or some people within it, I'm not speaking for everyone, but some pretty you know, vocal people within it started to say, oh well, you know, actually this thing isn't so. Something we have to worry about too much. And then that's when the rest of the world kind of, so it's like it all switched places, and then the rest of the world started kind of coming to that point of being terrified to the level that, you know, a lot of the Bitcoiners had already been through that for like 2-3 months and then gone, oh, actually we don't have that much to worry about. And then suddenly the rest of the world went into it. And now gradually people are kind of trickling over back to kind of a point of reality, I think. And this is something I do want to get into with you. But it's kind of taken a long time. I mean, I think it is happening, but it's almost like, certainly from my journey, it was initially kind of fear. Yeah. And then I was coming out of that fear just as everyone else was entering it. And then everyone else stayed in it for, you know, like, well, right up until now for a lot of people. But obviously there are some positive signs. I'm not sure if you'd agree with that. Yeah,
I would. I think if I could just go back a little bit, interesting you should say that about the fear aspect, because I think maybe that's one thing that stood out to me, in that the parallels of what was being said on mainstream media and, you know, what the politicians in the establishment were telling us, the parallels with what I'd understood have been brought up within the church community, right? It was like everything just matched. It was the same sound. It was the same language. So like, for example, we will tell you what you need to do to stay safe. If you obey us, you will be rewarded as like the good citizen, right? And it was that whole thing that brought back those feelings of when I've been in that before, of you're told something, you do it, and you live as the holy child that you're told to be. And yet it's still never enough. It never ends up how they say it's going to end up. You always feel guilty. You always feel ashamed. There's always this kind of extra line that you have to achieve. And it's interesting because people often say to me, like you said earlier, how did you know? I think that throughout history, whether it be, religious institutions, right? Whether it be political institutions, whether it be corporate institutions, they actually all fundamentally operate with the same premise. And that is scare people, make them afraid, and ultimately through fear, they feel that they need us to offer them a solution to their anxiety, if that makes sense. So for me, when I saw all this fear being pumped out, I thought, hang on a second, what happened to the British mentality of keep calm and carry on? Remember that from the war, right? So people would be going to school still in the Blitz. And I'm thinking like, why all of a sudden for this virus with a 99.97 survival rate, literally is everyone going to shit about this? It makes no sense whatsoever. But then when you realize that the whole point is this foundation of fear, and then when you realize how fear ultimately serves their goal of more control and things like that, which is what happened to me when I was younger. I was never really free within the church community. I thought I was, but I wasn't really. The parallels to me were just absolutely uncanny, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this has morphed into a religion of its own. I mean, it's right. Some days I would say it's a religion, and some days I would say it's a cult. I kind of fluctuate on a day-to-day basis. But
exactly right.
And to be honest, I think there's a lot of crossover between the two anyway. So, maybe both can be true at the same time. But it certainly 100%. Seems to me that the religious parallels just keep on coming. I mean, it was always going to be that the vaccine was going to be like the kind of the baptism, the baptism is taking the vaccine. Yeah. I mean, that's just one of many. You've got the kind of dress with the mask, and you've got the kind of even the fact that the government people are called like sage. That sage, it's like sounds like some kind of religious kind of elders. Yeah. There's just so many kind of parallels to religion, and it seems to me that, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, whether in the absence of religion, as we've kind of got now, generally speaking, an absence of religion in the West, and especially in the UK, more so even than other kind of English-speaking countries like Australia and America, etc. It seems like we were kind of primed to kind of jump on the bandwagon. It's almost like there was this kind of God-shaped hole which we were all ready to fill. As soon as it came around, it's like that's our religion now. The COVID religion is our thing.
You've hit it on the head there, because for me, again, I've heard actually atheists say this, right? I was just watching a program the other day, and unfortunately I can't remember his name, but he was talking about how he was an atheist, right? But he still believes there's a God-shaped hole. Now, I just thought, to me, that was fantastic, because I often say that I'm an atheist who believes in God, right? As in, I don't believe in the God that's being presented to us by the religious institutions. I believe that we are divine beings, beings of light, whatever you want to call it. All of us are so unique and rare. And I think what's happened, as you say, humans, they've lost that sense of divinity in a way. They've become so materialistic, so finite in our way of thinking. A lot of that, like you rightly said, is very much a Western kind of modern world thinking. And I think if you look at the reason why most people connected to the church community, it was because they felt alone, they felt guilty, they felt ashamed, they felt in lack. There was something missing from their lives, right? The day-to-day grind of life just wasn't doing it for them anymore. And I think, like you say, I think as we've broken away from that spiritual kind of anchor, people are looking desperately for that collectivism. So at this point, we would get to, why does BLM exist, right? Why does the vegan movement exist? Why does feminism exist? Why does, LGBTQ, right? They are all models that allow collectivism, which in a way, people are desperately looking for a collective ideology to give them security rather than understanding their individual sovereignty. Does that make sense? So that sense of the power of the individual and the individual's ability to form their own identity and to think. We're being told all the time that, no, this is the narrative, this is the dogma. If you join our dogma, you will have a reason, some sort of kind of goal as part of the collective. And I think that that's a very dangerous place. I know Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this. It should be first the individual, then the collective. But for some reason, I'm quite shocked it's gone this way, right? Because I thought it would have gone the other way, that as we pushed more into this very much egotistical society where everything's about self, right? That people would be far more independent and wouldn't swing to the collective. But I've actually been proved wrong with that. I don't know whether you've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, but at the end of the day, we have seen with with things that have gone by, for instance, like Maoism is a great example, and things that have happened in kind of like Bolshevism. They normally try to kind of get rid of the existing paradigm so they can kind of slip into that gap. Like the Chinese, they hate religion. And to this day, the Chinese are completely, against all forms of religion. I would say that some of these things, they're not necessarily all harmless. All harmful, right? I mean, there are forms of collectivism which are not causing any harm to anyone because they're not taking anyone else's rights away, right? So for instance, because I have to pick you up on this because I am a vegan, I wouldn't put vegan in those same categories necessarily, or I definitely wouldn't. But I wouldn't also put, even for instance, as long as you're not trying to take the rights away of someone else, like I think that it's a healthy form of collectivism, as long as your attitude and your kind of what you're doing with your own life is not actually removing or trying to take away the rights of others. The problem is when you're trying to kind of like manufacture hatred towards others, right? So, for instance, with like Nazism, obviously there's a target of that. There's a target of that hate with kind of like in Stalinist Russia and stuff. There's all there's even just the greedy capitalist being a target of hate, right? And kind of BLM, for instance, some of it might be harmless, but it does seem to have kind of taken on this kind of you have to hate anyone who's not repenting for their whiteness or whatever, or who isn't kind of signaling for your cause. It's like it's just like just leave people alone. And my attitude with any form of collectivism is, because I was talking to Seba Bekasis about collectivism. I don't know if you know him, but like he's kind of like pro collectivism as well, but like pro healthy forms of collectivism like community and localism, etc. But I would completely agree with you. There are toxic forms of collectivism, and it seems like the one that we're in now is a kind of blind worship of government. Like government is going to just supply, government's going to do everything for us and we need to just do whatever. And if someone isn't going with what the government want, we've got to take their rights away. The people who won't take the vaccine, who won't wear the mask, who won't do X, Y, Z, who won't, lock down their businesses. It's like a kind of a hatred of a group. And that for me is where the ultimate problem lies.
Now that's interesting you should say that. So if I was to reverse, I think I'm glad you raised that point, because collectivism is an interesting word. I think often, let me put it this way. So whenever the collective is based on a fundamental ideology, right, by which the dogma is set and therefore we have a concept, what's called the othering. So basically it's us versus them. We are here, they are there. We are on the right side, they are on the wrong side, etc., etc. The collectivism isn't collective to create a community of oneness for those involved, right? It becomes an ideology that ultimately serves to other those who aren't, if that makes sense. So, for example, I'm still part of my dad's church. We are a collective, right? We all believe and view things differently, which is quite rare generally for a church community, because generally you would have a particular creed you had to follow. I would say we have a collective, focus of that we are all spiritual divine beings, that we come together, and ultimately we want to create an environment where many different thoughts and views can be shared, really to increase the awareness and openness of people, and really bring people to more of a more of an awakening within themselves, right? But as you said, I think the problem is when something becomes so fundamental that basically if you sway from that, or you don't conform to that or ask questions, that somehow you are then the pariah, so to speak, or you are the leper, right? Which is what we're seeing now with this COVID situation. That's when, to me, collectivism slips into an arena where, I don't know if you've heard this before, there's a concept called the common enemy concept, where most fundamental ideologies have to have an enemy.
Right.
So it goes from being, so for example, like let's just take you as a vegan, right? Rather than it celebrating and you being so settled and happy with the choice that you've made in your life, and therefore you tell me about that and inspire me with your life, that I maybe think, oh, actually, I'm so inspired by the way he's living, I would quite like to maybe try some of those things, right? I think,
and actually on that point, because I totally agree with what you're saying here, and there is a kind of common thing in the vegan community which really pisses me off, where people, rather than doing exactly what you say, it's almost like, they go around saying, take that fur coat off, I'm going to do that, like throwing blood at, fake blood at people on the street or some craziness. It does have a cultish kind of element, and actually some of the loudest voices, unfortunately, are on the more cultish side of it. Like I hate, for instance, like PETA, that as an organization, I hate them. I think they're generally speaking, are a kind of pretty crazy organization and very quite on the culty side. Whereas, my attitude, and this is where I would make that distinction on different types of collectivism, is does your form of collectivism afford everyone the exact same rights? Okay, so that's the difference, and that's why, someone, for instance, who is BLM, okay, I believe Black Lives Matter. I assume that most people do. And if that's your belief, that's fine. I want Black people to have exactly the same rights as I do. I don't want them to have extra rights though, right? I don't want to go and have to apologize for being white when I haven't done anything other than been born a certain skin color, right? Because I'm not going to be racist towards someone else, but I also don't want them to be racist against me. So the problem in that movement is when people say, no, you've got to repent for this, or, we're going to kind of give special privileges to these people because they're a certain race, because that's racism. And, my view is that racism is wrong in all directions, right? So that would be probably the distinction for me is everyone afforded the same rights within this form of collectivism? And if it is, generally speaking, it's healthy, which kind of brings us on to the kind of the vaccine stuff, which is that, the unvaccinated now are the public enemy number one, right?
Yeah, it's really, like I say, a common enemy. They have found their group. They have now othered the unvaccinated because of what they've been told is the narrative that is the truth. I did actually talk the other week about the concept of why people get this way. And they say that it's about 30% who are immensely brainwashed of the population with all this. And it's a concept, it's a podcast I watched. It's a concept called mass formation. And basically what happens is the reason why they will go to these lengths is because this particular group of people were so anxious that the government said, this is the object of your anxiety, right? This is the solution to your anxiety, and therefore we will make it right for you. So what do people do in this heightened sense of fear? They think, I'm feeling anxious right now. They're telling me if I follow what they say, they will make it better. So they join this group. Now, the problem with that is over time, they become more and more and more brainwashed because of more and more fear. We know this is what propaganda does, right? To the point where crazy atrocities can be committed, right? So you just look at Nazi Germany, things like, Russia, things like that. And I don't know whether you've ever read stories before about how, things like the witch hunts in Switzerland, right? I didn't realize this, but basically, it was a period of time where there was famine, there was poverty, all this stuff going on. And the government's basically decided, how do we alleviate the anxiety of the people? We'll just tell them that it's because of witches, right? So at one point in Switzerland, basically there was hardly any women because they were going around killing women because the government had said the object of your anxiety is women who are witches. So without even thinking that that's the most irrational thing that anybody could ever said, what did they do? They went around killing women. And eventually there was hardly any women left in Switzerland, right? So I look at that, and I'd never even read that before. I didn't even know that was the case. So then I'm thinking, we're just seeing the same process happen again, where what I would say, and I don't know whether you agree with this, a bit like what you said earlier on, people think their anxiety is COVID. People think their anxiety is the unvaccinated, right? They're being told that that's what their anxiety is. If we get rid of X, you will be fine and you will be healthy, you will be well. My main struggle with that is, and I've seen this actually for the last few years, people are already anxious, if you get what I'm saying. We live in a very anxious society. More antidepressants now are given out than ever before, right? People struggle with our identity. They struggle with worth. People, even like as young as, 6 and 7, I have kids that I teach who, the parent says, oh, he's struggling with his anxiety today. And you think, it wasn't even a concept, right, that I understood when I was a child. So generally there has been the shift that people are anxious, but rather than really addressing the root issue of what is going on, and this comes back to what you were saying, this kind of God-shaped hole in people's lives, what's happening is institutions like big corporate medical institutions and governments all over the world are playing on the fact that people are more anxious than ever, right? And desperately looking for something to pin that anxiety on. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It definitely seems that that's exactly what's happened. And people are very ready and willing to just accept whichever enemy is being pointed at by the government. I mean, it's crazy that this has been able to happen because, in the past, it's like, oh, okay, look at those terrorists over there. Look at these bad people here. But now the kind of crosshairs have turned on the unvaccinated, as this group. I hate that term, but, I'm kind of using their language here. And this is just people's own friends and own families. And I'd always wondered, well, how have these atrocities that we've seen in the past, how did they come to pass? We learn about them in school and you're just like, God, that is just, how did that ever happen? How could society ever have allowed this to happen? And now the scary thing is I've had that question answered. I've completely had that question answered. There's no doubt in my mind now. And I thought I would live my entire life wondering. I thought I would live my entire life looking at things like 1930s, 1940s Germany and thinking, wow, that's just a mystery to me. How did that ever happen? I no longer will go to my grave with that mystery in my mind. That's been completely answered for me.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think I would say maybe where we are slightly different is that I always, in the back of my mind, knew how it had happened in the respects of, again, going back to what we'd said earlier, I saw what the collective othering did within the context of the church, right? So they were the sinner, thank you, God, that I'm not like him over there kind of thing, very subtle finger pointing. It was always about addressing the other and those who were, not keeping the commandments or this, that, and the other. And in a way, I realized that the people as a group joined in believing that and therefore would all together other somebody else. So when we're looking out to Germany, for example, the government, in a way, all they had to do was spread seeds of fear and tell them what the narrative was. And subtly over time, I do think at this point, I've got to say, it has to be a repetitive message. I don't think if they'd have just said, we're locking down, it's dangerous, and that was it, and nothing was ever on TV again, and there was never any repetition of these, new normal, stay home, save granny, you're going to kill granny, all of this sort of stuff, right? I don't think it would have ever got this far. But if you think about it, most religions and most cults, right, they're going into a room 2, 3, 4 times a week, and they are being repetitively spoken the same things over and over again of what the creed is. And ultimately, over time, the atrocities, like you say, the atrocities that can be committed is just absolutely remarkable, which does concern me where we are now, I have to be honest. I go through these days where I feel worried, right? And at the same time, not worried. It's like this kind of paradox of emotion that I feel. I don't know whether you get this at all. On one side, I kind of feel liberated and excited because I just think, are we about to witness the biggest awakening of all time? Or are we literally doomed? Do you get what I'm saying? I know that sounds really negative, but...
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. Yeah, I also go through those fluctuations because the way that I see it, you know, we've come so far. It's almost like we've already reached this fork in the road, and I don't know which fork we're on. It's like some days I'm like, okay, we're on the fork to the camps. And some days I'm like, no, we're actually on the fork to an awakening here. And, you know, one is obviously incredibly, you know, dangerous. And it's almost like we're kind of oscillating between these two places. Like, I'm never quite sure where we are. But I think I am more positive recently. I think that the government has proven itself to be illegitimate. And the way I see it, you know, whatever happens now, governments are good. It's inescapable now for governments to be kind of revealed for what they really are, you know, because they've come so far with this that they can't back down now. But also, if they continue, there's so many people holding the line that they're going to have to do something incredibly historically of huge historical magnitude to be able to, you know, because what are they going to do? What are they going to do with all of the people who aren't going to get this vaccine? Like,
I would agree.
You know, essentially, it's like a game of chicken, and we're not moving. So governments are going to have to show their real, true, ugly nature. So, yeah, I think either way there's going to be fireworks. It's just that obviously I hope that there's fireworks without an atrocity happening. Unfortunately, when you look back through history, we've never before kind of reeled back from this. We've never, you know, I can't think of, maybe it's happened, it's just that you don't hear about it. So there's a bit of a selection bias there, but I can't think of a historical example where you're kind of staring down the bullet of the gun of a government and that they've come this far and that it's kind of been walked back. So, but hopefully this will be the first time, you know, because I do think there's an awakening going on. So maybe this will be it. Maybe this will be the time when, you know, something amazing happens and all these kind of criminals are revealed for what they are. And we have, you know, Nuremberg too.
Yeah, I would agree. It's interesting because when you were talking then I was thinking there's a concept that my dad talks about. He says, you know, we're never going back to the way it was. Never. I will never, ever go back to the way it was. Once you come this far and entered this kind of place of true liberation and true freedom and true community, you don't want to go back to that way of thinking because actually all it did was brought this overarching sense of shame and guilt and unease. Now, what you said there was interesting because I do think as far as this has come now, I don't think so much of it can be reversed because it has, you know, they talk about they've basically shown their hand, right? And they've shown their full cards of what it is really they're aiming to achieve, which is why I still find it fascinating that, you know, they're basically telling us what they're doing. And people are just willingly complying. They're not even really having to hide it anymore. But I think when you talk about an awakening, the hard part of that for me is, so I watched my dad's church go from about 400 people to about 50 people in 17 years. It didn't get bigger, right? And a lot of that was to do with the fact that people actually prefer certainty and security over freedom, right? One of my favorite writers is Soren Kierkegaard, a philosopher. And he talks about how anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, right? The idea that freedom actually makes people dizzy because it's almost like they don't trust to be able to make decisions for themselves or within their community. So my concern is that Yes, I believe that we need to be liberated from this. And yes, we are holding the line. And I want a new system. I want a new way. I want more power to go back to the people. My concern is that there's, for some reason, humans seem to always want to revert back to being told what to do and having an establishment dictate how they live their lives. I don't know whether that makes sense here.
Yeah, it does. I mean, have you seen that meme, "Govern Me Harder, Daddy"?
Yes, it's great. It's perfect.
Like that. Yeah, like that meme really is a picture telling. What is it? A picture telling 1,000 words. Like 100%. It's so true. It's really unfortunate because actually I think that people will get, if they just allow themselves to kind of become on board with the concept of freedom, their lives will be so much more kind of fulfilling. They will be more fulfilled as an individual. But unfortunately, so many people, just like you say, they want that security, and it's almost like the government really is their daddy or is some kind of maternalistic or paternalistic figure in their lives. And they just want, that's what they want. They want to just, the governments tell them what to do and, to tell them when to queue up and get the next vaccine, and they put on a mask, and this is how many people you can hang around with, and this is what to think. And, it's a shame because not only is it just a way of living which is not going to provide any fulfillment, but I guess just you're never going to become self-actualized under that paradigm.
That's very true. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And the sad reality is, and this is what, again, it shocks me even now, and I don't know whether this shocks you too, but in a way, those who have complied and been vaccinated, right, and done as they were told, are no freer now than they were. They think they may be, but they're just not at all. And I said from the get-go, I mean, I wasn't going to have it anyway. I decided from day one that this is where it was heading, and I would never go down that road. But I also knew that those who did have it would, whilst they wouldn't be the focus of the negative attention, i.e. the unjabbed are the ones who are seen as like the pariahs or whatever, right? They still would not be free. And that, again, just spoke volumes to me, because I would speak to people who did everything right within the church community, and yet they were still miserable. And I'd think, hang on a second, you've told me you've tapped into something here, like this whole kingdom of God kind of reality, and yet you're not happy. There's no joy. There's no fulfillment, like you were saying about what true freedom really should bring, absolute liberation and joy, right? And it's actually because they were doing everything that they were told to do, right? But actually it really wasn't making them feel any freer. And again, I've seen that as a parallel now. There are people I know who are already, talking about their fourth in the new year, getting, whatever. But yet still not really living any freer lives. They're still frightened. They still don't really want to go anywhere. They still can't travel. And sadly, though, that doesn't ever seem to push them to a point of thinking, hang on a second, I did as I was told, but it's still not bringing me any freedom. What they do instead is, rather than taking responsibility to say, no, this isn't working for me now, they have to find somebody else to blame, which sadly, the blame game ends up on those who have chosen to not partake in this particular process.
Yeah. And it is very ironic that the people who are most afraid are the people who are now triple vaccinated, and the people who are least afraid are the people who haven't had a vaccine. And we're constantly being told, but it's so dangerous. And if you catch COVID, this, that, and the other. And it's like, okay, well, like I would happily do it tomorrow. Like if someone was like, okay, you've got to catch COVID, because I would actually love the opportunity just to kind of prove, like, I haven't had it. I mean, I know like a lot of people have had it, but like I haven't had it. But I was arguing with some guy on Twitter, and he was like, oh, well, if you're so unafraid of COVID, why don't you like walk onto a COVID ward in hospital? I dare you. And I was like, give me the opportunity and I'll do it. I would literally do it tomorrow. Like absolutely no questions asked. This section of the conversation has been censored in order to meet the community guidelines. For the full uncensored version of this conversation, please check the description for links to censorship-free platforms. And the unvaccinated are the least afraid. And it's just, that's very telling of where we're at. Society is not necessarily divided between kind of the vaccinated, who are, protected and they're out and they're living their lives, and the unvaccinated who are at home, whatever. It's the unvaccinated who actually are kind of completely unafraid. And also, to go back to what you were saying about who's more free, in this new paradigm, in this kind of post-COVID world, I think that it's the people who are like me and you, right? Like, we're having this conversation now. We would never have had this before. I'm having conversations with people every day. We've all got these great communities, whether it's on Twitter, people are doing meetups in the park, meetups in the pub, whatever it is. We are actually living a great life now, even though our freedoms are being taken away, bit by bit they're being taken away, but we have kind of embraced it and gone, we're going to make something of this. And if anything, my life has been to some degree more fulfilled, because actually kind of adversity can actually offer you an opportunity to kind of become more self-actualized and to kind of go deeper into your own personal philosophy and your own spirituality, etc., which I think that a lot of people have done. And I don't see that happening on the other side. I just see people still in fear, still wearing masks, still, just queuing up for the next vaccine. And, maybe those people, if they actually embraced our kind of mindset, would find the actualization which they're hoping to get from just following the rules and following orders.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, you read stories, don't you, about Nazi Germany, of people who are in the camps, saying, before they escaped, they felt free because they basically had decided that you can take my body, but you can never take what's inside me. You can never take who I am and my soul. And it's interesting, because I came to this revelation a couple of weeks back. I was looking around, around at people, and I thought, how is it that people who've been double jabbed are freer than me? I don't get how that works. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, no, actually, they're not. They only think they're free because they've done as they were told. Actually, in a way, there's nothing more than a freedom where you have made your own decisions for your own life. And with that, we've got to remember, might come consequences, right? There might be consequences. I'm hoping that the consequences are, really bad. But at the same time, I think that, like you say, there is something about this journey that is bringing people to a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, right? What it means to interact, what it means to learn and understand, and really the importance of this thing we call life. I mean, one of the things that's made me the most sad is how this desperate clinging to our biology, right? Hopefully we get a good 80 years on this earth, maybe more if you're lucky, right? But I look at some of these people who are elderly, who, maybe don't have that long left in their life, and their desperate need to survive through this fear. They potentially now are not going to live again. That this might be it now. If this goes on for 3, 4, 5 years, the last part of their life has been bound to their house, absolutely tormented by fear. And yet they've survived, right? They've survived COVID. But at what cost? At what cost have they survived, in that they've not lived for the last 5 years? And often people get shocked when I say this. I would certainly be willing to catch COVID and die for the sake that everybody can have their life and live freely, because I don't want to see anybody have to live in a position where they really are living, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think what you say about that individual, like from an individual perspective of, like giving up your life in order to survive, is you can kind of extrapolate that out really onto kind of a collective level, whereby, as a society, we're really in a position where we say, do we just get rid of all of our kind of values as a society, just fundamental ideas of freedom, bodily autonomy, the ability to travel, the ability to see your friends and family, doing normal things like, going to parties or whatever it is. Do we just give that all up because, we're afraid of transmitting, a virus to each other? Or do we accept that that is just a part of life and we actually try to have fulfillment out of life? And, it seems crazy that we've kind of made this trade-off, which I just think, like, any rational society would never make that trade-off, just would never make it. When we hear about, things like people who lived, not even that distant, not even that far removed from us. It was a very common trope that, you don't give away your kind of freedom for safety and security, right? Like this was basically the formation of America was on this entire premise, so. But yeah, we're now living in a world in which people are like, oh yeah, of course you give away your freedom. And you hear it all the time. You hear these media pundits and they're like, what, you think your freedom is more important than my safety? And it's like, yes, like categorically, yes, it absolutely is. Your safety is less important than the freedom of the whole of humanity. Like, I'm sorry to break it to you.
And actually, your safety is your responsibility.
Right.
Like that is something that's on you. So, for example, some people would say, yeah, but okay, I might get in a car and I've worn my seatbelt, I've done everything to stay safe, right? But I get hit by a joyrider and die, okay? So was that somebody else's fault? Yes, right? But did I choose to get in my car and drive on the road? Yes. So if I want to stay safe from joyriders, what is it? It's my responsibility to never get in my car. And this is what I'm noticing more and more. You've just touched on it there, is that for some reason we've got to a place where we believe it's others' responsibility to change and make me feel a certain way, right? And that whole thing of feelings, I mean, we could talk about for hours, which we won't have time, but it's like, you made me feel upset. You made me feel offended. You made me feel unsafe, this, that, and the other. And my issue with that is, okay, maybe they did, right? Maybe they were an ass. Maybe they weren't very nice. But at the end of the day, the only person who can change your reality and how you feel is you. So if you feel unsafe, if you feel worried, you are adult enough to make decisions in your life that serve that purpose of keeping you safe. But to demand everybody else to conform and change their life to make you feel a certain way, to me is a place in Western culture, right, that I think it's a very dangerous premise. And in a way, it's one of the things about the West that I actually don't like anymore, if that makes sense. Because we talk about the West, we love the fact that it's a democracy, so to speak. But at the same time, I think that, this whole thing that at school we teach kids that, you should never be offended, no one should ever hurt your feelings, nobody should this, nobody should that, blah, 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 blah. We're raising a generation of people that believe everything is other people's responsibility, rather than you making informed decisions for your own life. And we've kind of come full circle, because I think, again, that is the whole point of, you're a sovereign being. I think when people understand their own sovereignty and take responsibility for their lives, I think it brings with it a sense of power. So, for example, if I was scared of COVID, terrified of COVID and thought I was going to die, the sense of power for me would be, I'm going to stay in my home and I'm going to keep myself safe. That's where the power lies. Now, we could laugh at that, whereas I would say, I know people, right, who don't support all of these measures, who were afraid of COVID. They chose to isolate because they wanted to keep themselves safe. To me, I've got no issue with that. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They didn't try and blame other people and get other people to change. So I think that within all of this, I do think there has to be this swing, and I'm hoping that we are part of that evolving conversation. That, like you say, sacrificing what it means to be human and what it means to be free isn't trumped by the need to feel safe and secure, because I don't think it will end well, and people really won't ever truly live.
I completely agree with all of that. Yeah. And, like going back to your kind of driving analogy, it's like if someone came out tomorrow and said, everyone's got to stop driving because, I'm afraid of getting hit by a car, so now we've got to ban driving. Everyone would presumably understand that that's a completely crazy concept. But, that's the direction we're going in. I mean, I wouldn't put it past society now that if you fast forward 20 years, that someone will make that suggestion and everyone will be okay with it, because once you've cross that line where you basically say that your fear, in this case, it's irrationally so, but even if it's a legitimate fear, trumps people having, fundamental freedoms like being able to congregate, being able to travel, being able to, drive or whatever it might be. Once you've kind of crossed that paradigm, there's no end to it. I often use this analogy that like, I don't see any difference, and I've yet to have someone kind of point out to me whether there's any difference between saying to people, you've got to give blood, right? It's your civic duty to do it, and we're going to force you to do it, right? Because we know it will save lives, and forcing people to take this vaccine. As far as I'm concerned, there is no like ethical or philosophical difference between those two things. One is obviously more visceral, right? One is more, you can kind of, it seems worse to say people got to give blood, but the logic's exactly the same. We know that if more people give blood, more people will be saved, but we accept as a society, your blood is your own, and it was voluntarily given. Now with this vaccine, we've flipped it the other way. We've said, it's your body, but you've got to take it to protect others. And it's a complete inversion of every Western value that we've held for, millennia.
It really is. And I think I was brought up always being told my life was not my own, right? That was like a theme. Your life is not your own. That somehow I was just subordinate and that I had to give and give and give and give. And, it was all about sacrifice and all of this. And I think it's one of the biggest lies, actually, because I think that the greatest gift that man can give is when they are so settled in themselves and they have such a self-love, right, of taking care of their own being. They naturally then give that to others. So, for example, the gym that I work at, I work around a lot of what I call COVID bedwetters, who are absolutely like, convinced that we're still all going to die. I never, ever, ever treat them in a way that's disrespectful, rude. Like I don't agree with their premise, and I'm angry that they've been made to feel that way because I believe that it's unfounded. But I always go out of my way to serve them and offer, if they ask me to keep my distance, things like that, I will respect it, things like that. And I think the sad part is if they were to find out, for example, I was unjabbed, they wouldn't offer me that same courtesy, right? And I think the only way you can offer courtesy to one another, and this comes back to the collective, is when you are so settled in the choices that you have made, you don't need to impose those upon other people. Because I feel a lot of the issue with the jabbed and their belief, because I don't think it's everybody, we've got to be careful, not all double jab people have this view, right? It's a group, but it's not everybody. The group that seems to be the noisiest about it, I would say it's because they are categorically unsettled in the decision that they have made and also unsettled in how they feel. And rather than addressing that, they then put that onto somebody else. And I think that is something, this whole my life is not my own. No, your life is your own, right? You are the master of your being. No one else is. And to suggest that somehow everybody is in control of how you feel and think and live your life is just, it's just ludicrous, really. It's just not true. And I think that somehow in all of this, right, this whole process, we have to get people back to that premise. And I don't know how it's going to happen. Like conversations like this will make it happen, right? Maybe even if one person was to listen to this and think, oh yeah, like I've never really heard it worded like that before. That makes so much sense to me. Whatever. I think that we just have to keep speaking out and encouraging people to become far more independent in their thinking and how they perceive life.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you say there. Like, it's occurred to me as well that it does seem like the people who are pushing the hardest for others to have the jab seem. I mean, first of all, they obviously don't trust their own jab, because otherwise, why would you be screaming at everyone else to get it? Like you're protected, like, enjoy it. But it kind of reminds me, like when, perhaps people in your life that are like this as well. Like when someone gets success, like, I like to kind of, if someone tells me they've done something that's really successful, like I celebrate it in them, and I always try to watch these, emotions within me that might be there, like jealousy and, you know, like thinking, oh, you know what, that they're kind of overshadowing me and whatever they're doing. I always try to keep those emotions in check. I think everyone has them to a degree, but I always try to be like, no, I'm going to feel really, really positive about this person. You know, if someone's got like a great job or whatever, you know, I'm going to be like, yeah, that's really awesome. Like, you know, I'm so happy for you. But there's a certain type of person who you just know that they're going to be negative about it. They're going to be like, oh yeah, but that person, you know, they did that. They only got that job because, you know, their family knows the person who was hiring, or, you know, they managed to go to a good school because their parents were rich or whatever. And it almost seems like this similar psychology is within the vaccine thing. It's like, I've got this vaccine and I'm now, you know, nothing's making sense. But rather than me saying, hey, this doesn't make sense, they're saying, no, I'm going to tell everyone else that they've got to get it because they've got to feel like I do. I want everyone on my level. I want everyone pulled into my reality rather than, you know, questioning my own decisions and my own outlook.
Well, right, because to pull people into your reality, again, gives you a sense of security that your belief is right. You can justify your belief if you pull everybody into that world. Yeah.
You have to adapt to the reality of the world and not kind of try to pull the world into your reality. You have to change your ideas and views. And this is kind of what a lot of people, like, unfortunately, are not doing, is that they're not recognizing the reality of what's going on, and they're just digging their heels in deeper. And, you know, it's really not serving anyone. This section of the conversation has been censored in order to meet the community guidelines. For the full uncensored version of this conversation, please check the description for links to censorship-free platforms.
Totally. And at this point, I would say, because you've raised something very important there, I do actually have, weirdly, and people laugh at me for this because they're like, well, you know, I don't at all, but I have this weird form of compassion for those who are in this, particularly this 30% brainwash. Now, you could say, how can you have compassion for the people who basically have you shipped off on a train, so to speak? You know, like, you know, they don't want you here because you are the great unclean. Now, the reason I have compassion for them is because I think deep down, a lot of them know something's wrong and that they've been had.
I agree.
But to acknowledge that now takes so much humility and integrity, right? Which a lot of them don't have. I mean, integrity, the word comes from the word to be integrated, right? They're not integrated. They are just, they're segments of just all sorts of nonsense at the minute, right? They're basically, to be honest, I mean, you might even see this. I don't see them as people at the minute. I see them as absolute zombies. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they just seem to be so brainwashed that they can barely even, I see them walking around and they're like machines. And I look and sometimes I just feel so gutted for them because I just think, what has happened to you? Like, you know, the famous Lion King quote, you are, you know, Simba, you are more than what you have become, right? I look around and think humans are these most immensely incredible creatures. And yet I look at what these people walking around in mass sanitizing, you know, going about their daily life with very little enjoyment, really, and only fear. And that makes me really sad. I'll just tell you a quick story. I'll never forget the time when we were kind of deconstructing a lot of what we believe within the context of the church. My dad studied a lot of the original scripture in its Hebrew and Greek because he wanted to understand how certain words had been taken and completely misrepresented with regards to biblical teaching, right? So he all of a sudden researches the concept of where the word hell came from, right? Which is nothing like you are told, right? This word hell has been completely misunderstood, yeah? And without going into detail, he raised it with quite a lot of people as a congregation, you know, blah, blah, blah. And people were absolutely furious that you were suggesting that this concept of hell might not be a place that you go and burn for the rest of your days, right? And I was just mesmerized because I'm thinking, hang on a second. He's just said that this place that we feared all our lives isn't actually necessarily what we were taught. And it's been completely what's the word I'm looking for? It's been taken and put in a way that suits a particular agenda, mainly taken by the Greeks, you know, thousands of years ago or whatever. And yet a lot of teaching was based on this word that had been completely misunderstood and taken out of context with what it meant. And people actually left the church because we suggested that hell wasn't a thing.
What is it? Can you go into that a bit?
Yeah, I can actually. So the word that was replaced with hell, right, was this term called Gehenna, right? And when Jesus used the word hell in scripture, he was basically referring to a specific place outside of the Jewish walls, right? The city walls. Was the biggest rubbish dump in the city where dogs would eat the food. And you know where it says a gnashing of teeth?
No, I'm not too familiar with the Bible and stuff. But
so basically, he said, if you keep living your life the way you are now, your life will look like Gehenna over there. They knew what he was referring to because Gehenna was actually a specific place that they knew. And it was a place that everybody avoided. It was dirty. It was unclean. There was famine. There was dogs eating carcasses. It was a place you did not want to go. So then the Greeks decided to change that word to hell, right? They then said, hell is a place you go when you die. So then from that point on, the church has been teaching, basically, you will burn in hell, right? But that's not what it actually was written as at all. Yet when we suggested that this word had been made really to create fear as to gain more compliance from the followers, people left. They didn't want to get rid of it. Now, why am I saying this? I mean, it's been one of the biggest eye-openers for me. You could see in their eyes as my dad would deliver these things, really believing that he would deliver this thing. You'd think it would make people feel liberated that so much of what they'd been taught wasn't necessarily true and we could let go of that fear. Instead, the look in their eyes was one of absolute, if I acknowledge that what you're saying is right, that this word doesn't mean that, what other lies have I believed? And rather than at that point saying, this is an awakening for me now, I'm willing to walk this journey and realize that maybe things that I've learned have not been true, what they did was walk away and stay loyal to that, which made them feel safe. And I think we're seeing exactly the same thing with COVID. I think if they acknowledge that COVID has been a lie, they have to ask then what else has been a lie. And I think for some people, that is just a process that they just cannot embark on. I think I think the fear of COVID is better than the fear of the unknown. And you'll know from your journey, I mean, we've probably walked a very similar path over this last 2 years, but it does take some balls to face some of the stuff that we're seeing come out, and that you realize nothing's really as it seems, if that makes sense. And you always have to remain open to that. But that can make you feel sometimes quite unnerved in a way.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. And I think that in terms of that process of embracing that uncomfortable truth, a lot of people think it's going to be incredibly scary, but they actually find out, in my view, most people are going to find out that the other side of that is that you actually can evolve from it, right? Embracing truth in your life is a process that you go through, and it makes you grow. It gets you more kind of spiritually grounded. And when you don't embrace truth and when you hide away from it and you just say, no, I want to live in my comfortable, kind of lie, and I'm just going to believe all this just being told. None of it makes sense, but I'm not going to ask any questions because, exactly like you say, I don't want to face up to the fact that there might be things which are scary out there. Because COVID, in a way, it's a lot less scary than the concept that governments and international kind of institutions and corporations and that there is there is a they who are trying to oppress you. That's actually less scary. So that's actually more scary.
More scary, yeah, definitely.
So people will stay with the kind of COVID things. It's well, I'll stay in this kind of in this slightly more comforting lie than embrace a very, very uncomfortable truth. And but yeah, my experience, and I'm sure it's the same for you and a lot of other people, is that when you actually embrace truth and you say, no, I'm going to face the truth, and I'm going to open myself to the truth, whatever that might be, and I will go where that truth takes me. Yes, it's a scary path to walk, but it actually is the only path where you can become self-actualized and when you can become spiritually connected. The two are packaged together and they are quite kind of inseparable.
Yeah. So one of my favorite books was The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. If you haven't read it, it's a fab read. But I think it's that, like you say, that willingness to walk on a road where truth, because again, truth is a funny word. I believe that truth is fluid in a way, right? In that you may come to truth one day and it might be like a step up, but then 3 weeks later, you might hear information that makes you question that, and you may change your mind, and you may then adapt and adopt other concepts and thoughts. And, then from then on in a year's time, you might no longer feel that way anymore. You might change your mind again. But to me, that's what it is to evolve as a human being, right? There should never be this sense. Again, if truth becomes a dogma, because again, this is where we've got to be careful, the science, right? The truth. We can, again, even with that process, cut ourselves off from this absolute, I use the term smorgasbord, that sense of there's so much in life to be taken from and put back and then grabbed and picked up and tasted and tried. And, it really is an immense process of being. I think that for me, even with this COVID thing, I've been willing all the time throughout this last 2 years to ask myself, could you be wrong? Like, could you be wrong? And what I do is I take my thoughts to the drawing board and I say to myself, at this moment, I don't feel I am. So I continue to tell the truth with where I'm at. And I'm willing for somebody to come back at me and question that. But at this present moment, I still feel that I'm following the truth in my own self. But again, like I've said, it has to be an evolving, ongoing conversation. We can never allow that to stop. And whilst ever we're doing this, like I've said to you before, I do believe that this is the only route to freedom now, is by constantly speaking out, being open, encouraging people, really inspiring them to walk the journey to freedom and wholeness, and really let go of their fear. Because that's really the only place to be. And it's the only way that really we can create a fantastic future for both ourselves and future generations in a way. I guess we are on the front line of this war, you could say.
JC, that was beautiful. So I'm not going to add anything to that. That was great. Do you just want to let people know where to find you?
Yeah, sure. So I don't even know my Twitter account. How bad is that? I am on Twitter. JC_free82. Please follow me. And I'd just like to give a shout out to my dad as well, if that's all right. He does loads of fantastic talks. It's Q Church. You can find him on YouTube. That's Q Church in York. He does talk a lot about the spiritual journey. He does also connect it in with what's happened over the last 2 years and the parallels. So if any of you are interested in kind of like latching on to some of the understanding of what we've got over the last 17 years in our journey as well, you can certainly listen online. But thank you very much for having me anyway. It's been absolutely great.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So make sure you remind me to do that in case I forget. But yeah, thanks again for coming on. It's been a really awesome conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just encourage everyone to continue talking. Let's walk this journey together. And hopefully at the end of it, we'll really hit an awakening and come through on top here.
Awesome. Cheers.
All right. You take care, mate.